This presentation is one I've given a few times. Don't judge by that beginning. And it has its origins really in the fact that I've been reading Tony Custer's Model Railroad Planning magazine since issue #1. And he's a great advocate for junctions and interchanges as part of a layout plan. When I started to organize my pictures to give my own clinic on the topic, I learned that I probably could give 4 different clinics without any duplication of photos. So we might want to call this volume 1 or #1 of a junction and interchange clinic. So it's a junction, of course, is a place where 2 lines cross or meet. They're not always different railroads. For example, here at Belton Junction on the southwest corner of the Milwaukee metropolitan area, the Madison division to the right would meet the Wisconsin division trains to the left. And frequently junctions have interchanges, but not always. Here we are at Rochelle in the days before the railroad park existed, and that track off to the left was a rickety interchange between the CB&Q and the Chicago and Northwestern. By the time I started going to Rochelle in the 1980s, however, it was typically a place for maintenance of way cars to be parked or bad order cars to be parked. It was no longer truly an interchange between those railroads. So you can have a junction without an interchange. But for those of you who've been to Rochelle, we're looking due east, and that rickety track, which is now gone, had originally been an interchange. The thing about interchange, and of course this is what attracted Tony Custer to it, is it's a way of bringing cars onto the layout or having cars taken off the layout in a prototypical way where those cars don't really serve a purpose on the layout itself. In other words, they're not going to or from any particular industry that you might be modeling. It's a way of expanding your options in terms of the kinds and number of cars that you can have on a layout. Most of us have too many, but cars and sometimes even entire trains are handed off from one railroad to another. If you want to go the prototypical operations route, there are rules for loads and there are rules for empties and rules for car forwarding. This is where the OPSIG, the Operations Special Interest Group folks have spent a lot of time educating modelers about how to do it in a prototypical way. Just an example would be reverse routing for empties, sending it back the way it came, even if other interchange options presented themselves. By the way, this is at Davis Junction in Illinois. The DM&E, of course, is no longer running there, but the track we're looking at was a CB&Q / Burlington Northern / Milwaukee road track that went from Rochelle up to Rockford. And the track that goes from right to left was the former Milwaukee Road main line, later DM&E, and then now CP. There are entire railroads like the Indiana Harbor Belt or the Belt Railroad of Chicago that exist basically strictly to interchange between railroads, especially in a place like Chicago. But other places like Kansas City and other large and complex railroad rich cities like St. Louis have these basically intermediary railroads that handle the interchange between the bigger mainline railroads. Car ferries and car barges, both the East Coast kind that New York and New Jersey have, and the Great Lakes kind that Milwaukee had, this was the Grand Trunk Western in Milwaukee, are also a source of interchange between railroads. Grand Trunk would bring the cars over to Milwaukee, and both the Milwaukee Road and the Northwestern had tracks nearby that those cars could easily be forwarded to. So did the C&O with its car ferries. The C&O car ferry Badger still runs, but now it's automobiles and trucks only. Another form of interchange that modelers in some cases have explored is the joint trackage situations that exist. This is a map of all the industries on a piece of joint trackage between the Milwaukee Road and the Chicago and Northwestern here in the Milwaukee area. It was known as the Menominee Belt. To the north was the Milwaukee Road airline that provided a shortcut for trains going out of the Milwaukee Road yards west to Elm Grove and then on to the Twin Cities. So that was to the north of this map. To the bottom of this map was the Chicago Northwestern's Mitchell Yard, which connected up to the main line. And the two railroads would alternate by month, I think, at one time, who would run the whole jointly owned trackage. In other words, they weren't running it at the same time. They would alternate. So on the same tracks where one day you might see a Milwaukee Road locomotive, come back in a few weeks and you might see a Chicago Northwestern locomotive. And the two railroads both got interchange from each other via this Menominee Belt.
How would they work the crews on that?
Well, I think they just alternated, and those were normal switch crews. They didn't have joint crews on the same locomotive. It was either Milwaukee Road or Northwestern, and they used their own crews. Now, another advantage to junctions, at least, is the scenic interest that they can cause with interesting and unusual depots. And that was Joliet. This is Rondout, where the EJ&E crossed and continues to cross the Milwaukee Road, now Canadian Pacific. And there was also some dramatic bridges. If you've ever been to Blue Island, where multiple railroads all had to cross the same water at the same time in a massive junction that apparently has been modeled by someone who I suspect is not modeling in O scale, but it would be an ambitious and impressive piece of track work. There are also these junctions can cause rare and archaic practices to continue to be used long after they've disappeared just about everywhere else you could imagine. Even into the 1990s and perhaps into the 2000s at Rondout, again, that's where the EJ&E crosses the CP, Sioux, Milwaukee Road. They continued to hoop up orders on the CP track. This was during the CP era that these orders were being hooped up. And so it was a chance to actually photograph a practice that is otherwise only seen on excursion trains and maybe some railroad museums. Another place which continued to hoop up orders way after you no longer saw that in most situations was yet another junction. This is at West Chicago. So the track that I'm almost trespassing on was, again, EJ&E. And again, at this time it was the EJ&E getting the hooped up orders, and the tracks they're crossing were Chicago Northwestern, now Union Pacific mainline tracks. So the operator actually wouldn't typically stand out there. They'd let the order hoop just to be mounted and hope that the crew would be alert enough to grab their orders. You can see an EJ&E sign on the kind of the right side of the picture, JB Tower in their parlance. Still another junction that retained a very archaic practice is Brighton Park in the Chicago area, not too far from the Indiana border. And of course, these are semaphores, and that's not the archaic part, actually. The archaic part is that they were manually operated. A person would come out of that shed and grasp a lever and raise or lower the semaphores, depending on what they had heard, either over telephone or railroad radio, in terms of conflicting traffic coming up the line there. And somewhere here, I have a little cheat sheet at what's going on at Brighton Park. The track closest to the photographer is Norfolk Southern, former New York Central. The track closest to the little shed is CSX, formerly B&O CT. And then there's track on the other side of that little shed that's again Norfolk Southern, but this time former Pennsylvania Railroad. The track running basically right and left in the photograph was kind of a dog's breakfast of railroads. CN with UP and SP trackage rights, Illinois Central with Alton and GM&O trackage rights, and also you would see the Amtrak State House come up that track. So the fact that everything is stopped on the Pennsy, NS, and CSX suggests that something is coming up that line, and it may well have been an Amtrak train. I no longer recall. I took the picture too long ago to remember. But okay, it's now gone. They've taken away the manual semaphores, but that archaic practice of hand-operated semaphores was retained well into the 1990s. The other interesting thing, both from a rail fan and a model railroad perspective, is that you get to see foreign power on a home railroad where there is an interchange. This is a case where at the East Troy Electric Railroad, a set of South Shore cars was being delivered on the Canadian National, former Wisconsin Central, former Sioux Line trackage that goes through Mukwonago, Wisconsin. And the CN power that you see there somehow made it down the very steep and rickety siding that is the only connection with the outside world for the East Troy Electric Railroad, and dropped off its 5 South Shore cars and got out of the way. And then the Electric Railroad's steeple cab hooked up, and you had a rare chance to get some glimpse of just how tiny that steeple cab does not look small when you're actually looking at it, but when you see it next to a pretty normal Canadian National locomotive, it's dwarfed by the modern diesel. So that's an operational interest that can occur with junctions and interchanges. And similarly, you have a chance for freight cars to arrive and depart the layout at realistic online locations, which need not be completely modeled. You know, that track going down that grade just disappears into the trees. And I think that's how Tony Custer manages some of the interchanges on his nickel plate layout. There are special rules in most cases for which railroad delivers or takes And those things are agreed to between the railroads, and usually the operating unions have a say in that kind of stuff as well. So there's some things to research before you just proceed to have a junction with another railroad on your layout. But it can add interest and call for some interesting track planning as well. There's here on the west side of the Illinois River in Peoria, you get the Tazewell in Peoria switcher with cars that came from the east side, East Peoria, Komatsu in this case. So you get to have cars actually brought over the river and then being taken to their ultimate destination, which may well be a Burlington Northern Santa Fe train up to Galesburg. The variety of cars that I spoke about, the phrase Tony Custer has used is universal industry. An interchange is a universal industry because you have your industries on your layout and you get cars that either go to or come from that industry. But with an interchange, you might have cars that don't have any role to play on your layout, but you've got the cars anyway, since most of us have too many. So it's an interchange is a chance to get cars off your layout or bring them on. This particular interchange is between the Chicago and Northwestern and the Milwaukee Electric Railroad and Light Company. Note that it's a parallel interchange, not a crossing. And that opens up some track planning opportunities if you are thinking of an interchange on your layout, because the 90-degree crossing, which is kind of the cliche junction and interchange, is very difficult to do justice to on a layout without creating some real difficult situations about actually getting human beings to get the parts of the layout. Here's another example of a parallel interchange. The track on the right, where you see the freight cars headed by that tank car, that's the Wisconsin and Southern Railroad, formerly the Milwaukee Road that went from Milwaukee up to Horicon, Wisconsin. The sharp grade going downhill is to a small two-track interchange yard that exists between the Wisconsin and Southern and the Canadian National, formerly the Wisconsin Central, formerly the Sioux Line, off to the left. Those are mainline tracks off to the far left. And then this two-track yard is for interchange between the two, but it also serves another interesting use, which we'll get to in a short while. So I mentioned the challenges posed by having a 90-degree crossing on a layout. What do you do? I mean, our arms are only so long. How do you get around? You've cut yourself off from some of your track. And just a simple observation that even it becomes especially a challenge with really small layouts like this one. But functionally, what you see here is exactly the same functionally, not visually, but functionally as this. So it can be painful to give up the prototype appearance of a 90-degree crossing type junction, but if you really want to run your trains, I would consider replacing that with this. By the way, those are pictures of an N-scale prop that I use when I give the clinic live. It's two sides of the same piece of styrofoam. Here's another alternative. This is Kleiman Junction in Wisconsin on the Chicago Northwestern, now Union Pacific. This used to be a crossing. And like most crossings, it was maintenance intense. And so it's been replaced by two turnouts. Here's the line that goes south down to Jefferson Junction. And here's the line that at one time went north up to Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. So those two tracks, this is the Adams sub on the Chicago Northwestern, but those two tracks have taken the place of what used to be a 90-degree crossing. Now here's a view that should be familiar to several of you on this call, since this is Mason City, and this is Clear Lake Junction. The interchange between what is now the Union Pacific and the Iowa Traction takes place off to the left in this photo. You've got this nice 90-degree crossing, although note the gauge problem right at the crossing itself. Mm-hmm. But because of stored cars, and that's basically, I've been to Mason City now several times, and I've never seen the electric locomotive actually go across the UP. The wire is in place. I assume they must do it because they store cars there. But essentially, the 90-degree crossing is almost more like a visual prop. And that is kind of what Bill Darnaby of the Maumee route fame has done on his layout. He has many junctions, and many of them are 90-degree crossings, but they are in essence dummies and function primarily just to interfere with the traffic on the Maumee route, because he actually will run the signals so that a train has just gone through and, you know, darn it, you just missed it. He only has maybe 8 to 10 inches of track for these junctions. But the signal system tells the Maumee trains, well, you have to wait for a train that either is about to go through or just did go through and the signal hasn't cleared yet. A less known junction, but at one time a pretty busy one, is in Illinois, east of East Peoria, called Crandall. And the track that we're looking at went from East Peoria up to a place in Illinois called Ancona, where it joined the Santa Fe. This was actually Santa Fe track. It's all that's left now. It's basically a switch lead to an interchange track, but the track ends exactly where those bushes are. Mm-hmm. So this is, in a sense, also kind of a scenic effect. You'd be laying a track forever to model Crandall to Ancona, but that's it. It's terminated right there. And we'll talk more about Crandall in a second when we get into some nitty-gritty detail about junctions and interchanges. Here is Zering, Illinois. We're standing on the BNSF, former CB&Q. This is the line, the main line that goes from Chicago to Galesburg. And there was an interchange. That track off to the right was joint track, Milwaukee Road, but also, oddly enough, New York Central. This was probably the most obscure junction and interchange that the New York Central had on the whole line. And I'm sure that the CB&Q and the New York Central had a lot of interchange between the two, and they could have plugged this up if all of it came to Zering. Most of it undoubtedly was done in the Chicago area. Another junction and interchange that should be familiar to people on this call because we've talked about it before. This is Ackley, Iowa. And what I'm standing on a bridge, which I believe, it was closed to traffic and pedestrians were prohibited, but it was the only way I could get the shot. So we're looking west. The track below us is Canadian National, but it was built as Illinois Central. And that's just a simple siding their nearest photographer. But further down, you see that turnout heading to the left. And that was the site of a crossing and interchange with the Minneapolis and St. Louis, later Chicago Northwestern, and now the Iowa River Railroad. And that's it. That's the whole interchange and junction between the Iowa River Railroad and the Canadian National. And they get a fair number of cars there. Another type of interchange and junction, which I give a clinic on the Bucyrus Erie factory and its railroad, but this is not that factory, is an industry that has substantial railroad activities and has its own locomotive. This is Northern Rail Car, which is now out of business, but was located in Cudahy, Wisconsin, and it rehabbed both passenger and freight cars, had this nifty little SW1, and it operated just like an interchange. They would get damaged cars or cars to be worked on from the Chicago Northwestern or Union Pacific. And once they were done with their work, they would interchange them back with the UP or CNW. The tracks that I'm standing on are UP tracks, formerly Chicago Northwestern. And still another area that should be familiar to people on this call is Durand, Michigan. And Durand is interesting because you have this wonderful depot. This is not really north, south, east, west, but we're looking more north than we're looking anything. And the tracks in front of us are kind of east, west. That's the depot. So there is an interchange track from the northern and north, south, east, west lines. And in fact, we're now looking south, and there's yet another interchange track that leaves. You would want DCC if you wanted to even attempt this scene at Durand, Michigan. I'm told that this was not especially staged for this photograph, but I actually don't believe it. But the depot still stands. They've got a museum inside and I believe a layout. Here's another junction and interchange between two railroads in Plymouth, Wisconsin. The track that you can see, it was known as Cheeseville. The track that you see here was Chicago Northwestern track that came west from Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and joined a north-south track that was Milwaukee Road trackage that was the route of the famous passenger train, the Chippewa. And that would have gone, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but that would be Milwaukee Road. This would be the Chicago Northwestern. They approach each other. And then they cross. This is the Chicago Northwestern, crosses. This is the Milwaukee Road, crossing here. Both of those depots are still there. This depot is a restaurant. This depot is used as storage by the Wisconsin and Southern Railroad. And this smash board would, a simple hand-operated smash board would tell which railroad had the priority for the crossing.
There was a similar operation in Owatonna, Minnesota, where the Milwaukee Road branch line from Austin up to the Twin Cities came in from the south, and the Chicago Northwestern came in from the east. And they paralleled for a while, and then they swapped over because the Chicago Northwestern continued west and the Milwaukee Road swung north.
Interesting. And was it a smash board that looked like this?
I never saw a smash board.
Oh, okay.
The smash board, most of them in Minnesota, they look just like your regular road crossings, that you see.
Oh,
The ones I saw where the Milwaukee crossed like the Northwestern in Montgomery, Minnesota, they were built like the smash board was just like today you have a railroad crossing bar that comes down. except they were manually operated. A crew member would get out and lower them or raise them to cross the other railroad.
These smash boards look sort of like tennis rackets.
They do.
And that white building in the background, I believe, was a Kraft cheese processing center. Plymouth doesn't have all these interesting tracks anymore, but it's still an interesting place to visit. Also interesting is Canton, Illinois.
Oh, yeah.
This is a crossing of a CB&Q branch that left a branch. You had the line that went from Galesburg to Peoria, and kind of midway on that line was Yates City. There was a Y at Yates City, and that Y went south to the coal mining areas of that part of Illinois, and it passed through Canton, where it crossed over on a 90-degree crossing with the Toledo, Peoria, and Western. They had a signal, as you can see, but look what else they had, a kind of a farm gate on steroids, or at least a very tall farm type gate that would swing around and tell which railroad was the winner or the loser. So across a somewhat close-up view of the same, you can see the crossing was still in place on this view. But here, when I took this picture, it looks like I think we're looking south.
Yeah.
We're looking south, so we're on the CB&Q. There was an interchange track here, but it was being used just for work train equipment. And then this was the TP&W, later to become the Keokuk Junction Railroad. There's that piece of work train equipment and some interesting old sheds.
Yeah, unit coal trains used that for a while.
Notice that the sign says this is private property and trespassers are warned to keep off. So of course I ignored that, but it's the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe, because at that time they owned the TP&W. Well, the old farm gate has gone into tough times because the crossing was severed. The CB&Q tracks were removed. The crossing is no longer a crossing. I guess it could have been put back in, but it's actually also been severed at the Yates City end as well. So these tracks are no longer in service, and I believe the rails have even been pulled up. But the Keokuk Junction continues to run on former TP&W track, going from basically Peoria, well, to Keokuk. We're looking west on that track, and you can see that there was, whoa, I didn't mean to do that. So we will undo that. And if that looks like an EMD F unit on that track, that's correct. The Keokuk Junction had a fondness for F units, and they got a B unit off of the Algoma Central tourist train that they parked on that track for a while. Now I can't seem to. There we go. And there we have the Keokuk Junction F units coming through Canton. And this isn't all that many years ago, although I think it's now 3 years they've retired the F units. But there would be crowds of rail fans following this train, and the crew knew why we were following. They were under no illusions, but it was interesting while it lasted. So I mentioned Mason City and the Clear Lake Junction and the interchange track. Certainly the interesting locomotives that they have are a reason to go there if there is no other reason. But the operations are also interesting. And again, there's the same view of the junction itself, or the crossing, that is rarely used. But here we have the UP bringing traffic into the interchange tracks that are also served by the Iowa traction. And this day there were 2 locomotives working that interchange. And this is the view west, which gives you some flavor of what it's like to railfan the Iowa traction. But it's both a junction and an interchange with 100-year-old locomotives, nose to nose with modern diesels from Union Pacific. Well, we're back at Ackley, and so the track in front of us is Canadian National, former Illinois Central. We're looking north. That's Minneapolis and St. Louis trackage that is now totally severed and may even be ripped out now. But here's the interchange track to the Iowa River Railroad. They've got a derail, and the track heads south. At one time, this was the only locomotive on the Iowa River Railroad. They now have a Jeep 40 to go with this Jeep 30. And the industry it serves, there's just one customer. I think it's an ethanol plant, and they have their own locomotive. So even though it's just a single track with minimal turnouts, because the Iowa River Railroad goes past this facility and both ends have railroad connections to the industry, between the Iowa River Railroad and the switcher that belongs to the ethanol plant, they don't need more turnouts. They don't need a little yard. They can get everything done themselves. So the locomotive was bringing tank cars down from the Illinois Central / Canadian National. And then this is the south end of the plant, where you see the connection. Notice that this is not Lionel Super O track with a center third rail. That's the oil slick that the Jeep 30 leaves wherever it has been, and that super slick is where they park it. As you can see. But it's a neat, you'd kind of have your choice of what to model. If you could model the Canadian National, but frankly, they don't have much local traffic on that part of the line. It would make more sense to model the Iowa River Railroad and just have interchange cars magically appear on the Ackley interchange track and then deal with them here at your customer. It's really just a few miles long. And just behind the photographer is what would have been Steamboat Rock. So we're looking towards Steamboat Rock, but our view is obscured by these covered hoppers. The fact that they have covered hoppers there suggests that ethanol plant dries, the corn that isn't used for ethanol. There's still plenty of nutrients in it. And if it's kept wet, it's offered and sold to local farmers as cattle feed. But if it's dried, then it's shipped in covered hoppers and can be sent to any feed siding as animal feed, because there's still plenty of stuff left in the corn used in the ethanol process. Okay, we took a brief look a little while ago at Ackerville, Wisconsin. That's the interchange between the Wisconsin and Southern and the Canadian National. We're going to dig a little deeper now and see how it's actually used and what potential interest a junction interchange between the two railroads could add as a theme for a layout. And this is not just hypothetical. I took a friend of mine named Gordy Robinson here, and he was so bowled over by what he saw. And Gordy is from the Orkney Islands near Scotland. In fact, he's the president of the NMRA right now. But he's actually building a layout on Ackerville, Wisconsin, because he'd never seen anything like it. So This is just a routine Canadian National train. It's not dropping off any cars for the interchange with Wisconsin and Southern, but Canadian National trains do that. Now, here is a train that has come to Ackerville from Horicon, Wisconsin. It's heading for North Milwaukee. But it has work to do down in that little yard because there are cars probably for the Canadian National. So it goes forward and it's going to be backing up to drop off its Canadian National cars. But meanwhile, a train, another Wisconsin and Southern train, has come up from North Milwaukee and it's heading for Horicon. So the train that's the closest to the photographer has to back in. It's left, its Milwaukee cars are still on the left on the main to the west of the interchange turnout. So here's the West Milwaukee to Horicon train. They've left their cars for Horicon on the main. They're backing up to the cars for West Milwaukee. Now the power that originally came from Horicon is going forward to bring those cars from West Milwaukee into the little interchange yard here, including this interesting piece of graffiti that apparently the guy ran out of spray paint before he could finish his job. But so they're bringing that stuff into the, oh, I'm sorry, didn't mean to do that so quickly. So they're bringing those cars into the interchange, and the train that's on the main is going to continue on for West Milwaukee. But did you notice that the power is actually the power from West Milwaukee? That this means that the trains from West Milwaukee to Horicon and from Horicon to West Milwaukee meet at Ackerville. They do their work, leaving off cars for the Canadian National, but then the crews return home. In other words, there's no need for a crew van. Both crews, the Horicon crew that came down will take whatever cars were brought up off to Horicon, and the Milwaukee crew is now hooked up to cars that came down from Horicon, and off they go. So this is a junction and interchange and crew exchange on the Wisconsin and Southern in Ackerville, Wisconsin. And as you saw that there were trains going back constantly, the Canadian National is very busy there, lots of trains. So you end up standing on this bridge and taking lots of pictures. So, and the Milwaukee crew is heading back home to Milwaukee with cars that came down from Horicon, and their cars will soon be taken up to Horicon. This, I need to work on this image more because it looks awful, but this is Crandall. This is the interchange that I pointed out before where the Santa Fe, this is the Santa Fe, and at one time this was the Nickel Plate, and now it's the Norfolk Southern, crossed each other, very close to a 90-degree crossing, not mathematically 90 degrees, but very close to it. And you can see that this is where the track disappeared into the bushes. Remember the picture I showed of track just disappearing in the bushes? This is Santa Fe track heading north and east. It goes almost no further than the edge of this picture, but that track served as a switch lead so they can organize cars for an interchange track with the Norfolk and Western. Norfolk and Southern.
They can get the Morton too.
Yeah.
Morton.
Yeah.
Off to the left there. Yeah.
Norton is down
Morton
here. Morton is down here.
Yeah.
So there's also a track along here for those interchanges. Whoops, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So there's the crossing. We're looking almost due north. To our right is that track that disappears into the bushes. And I'm walking closer towards it. There it is. And you can
Yep.
see that the interchange siding comes off there. There's the bushes again. Now I'm turning around. Here's the interchange siding. It goes now geographically east. I would not suggest trying to use the second track here because clearly it's severed. But this is what it looks like looking geographic east. We're on the interchange track, and that's the Norfolk Southern track, former nickel plate, that's to the right.
Mhm.
Standing at the same crossing, now looking south and a little bit east. That's the other interchange track here. And so this would be, I think, Tazewell and Peoria. It would have been maybe even Toledo, Peoria, and Western may have come up this far. But
They
to the
use
extent,
it, yeah, they use it to get to Morton.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, Morton is down here, not
To
too
the
far.
left, to the left.
Oh.
Yeah, to the left.
Oh, here, yeah,
No, that's to the right.
no,
There, that
this
way.
is
That way, that goes to Morton.
that goes to Morton. Okay,
Yeah.
okay,
Well, yeah. Right. Mm.
yes. So here's now we're looking south. This is the former Santa Fe,
Mhm.
and then this would be the former nickel plate.
Right.
And you can see that at some point they replaced the crossing, but the used crossing that they had wasn't exactly what had been there before, so they had to do a little creative track laying to make it all work out.
Hmm.
And I was here for a long time taking these pictures, and we saw and heard no trains.
Mhm.
Concept of a roundabout.
Pardon?
I just, no, I'm, nothing. Thank you.
Oh, that's okay.
That's an interesting piece of track work.
Mhm. Yeah, there's some good videos on that on David Jordan's videos of the Peoria area showing trains on there.
I'd love to see them. I mean,
Yeah.
you'd have to know the schedule, and it
Yeah,
was
well, yeah. Morton used to have a lumber yard. They still have an agribusiness place where they get tank cars of liquid fertilizer. And they used to have the Big Libby's plant where they shipped canned pumpkin every fall out of there. Now it goes by truck, but it was a seasonal thing where they would gather all kinds of boxcars there and ship out the canned pumpkin for the Thanksgiving.
Well, if you have a hankering to get to Crandall, at least it has very good access by public highways. I didn't have to go tramping through the weeds to get here. And it's fully signaled.
Mhm.
So another fairly obscure, but if anyone here has been to the Rochelle Railroad Park, you were very close to the interchange and the junction at Flag Center, which is north and a little west of the crossing at Rochelle. This track here is the CB&Q, now BNSF. We're looking towards Rochelle itself. So in a railroad sense, the Savannah and the Mississippi River are kind of behind the photographer. But as you can see, coming out of Rochelle, there's a siding here that heads basically geographic north. So if the photographer turns around, now we're looking on the BNSF line going north and west, and there's another siding here because it actually forms, in essence, a Y. You won't see this anymore because the Illinois RailNet no longer serves this track, but the track, this is where it heads north towards Davis Junction and eventually Rockford, Illinois. This is now, I think the BNSF now switches this. Maybe the CP does it from Davis Junction, but this track either is due to be abandoned or has been abandoned.
Hmm.
So what we're seeing here as and this was also joint track with the Milwaukee Road. Milwaukee Road run right through Rochelle on CB&Q tracks. But there were still some industries on the line between Flag Center and Davis Junction. They no longer are rail served or are no longer in existence. So in the future, everything will be at Davis Junction looking north. And all the stuff at Flag Center, I suspect, has been ripped out. But it was an interesting junction because you have hundreds of rail fans at the railroad park who, if they would just get in their car and drive around a little bit, would have found something interesting and distinctive from a very railroad modelable little yard here at Flag Center for an interchange and short trains that would go up to Rockford. So, junctions are interesting because you get to see locomotives from two different railroads. But you do have to do your track planning a little better than this. And and you have to do your operations planning a little better than this. This is the great crash at Crush, Texas. The deliberately crashed trains that had advertising on all the boxcars. I mean, the people would vie for advertising on a deliberately crashed train.
Yeah, they did. My father used to go to the state fair where they would do this.
Oh my God.
Crash trains at the state fair. Buy tickets, sit in the grandstand, and they'd do that.
Wow.
The guy who took this picture, the engineer for, I think it was the Katy Railroad, had examined both locomotives and issued an opinion that there was no chance of a boiler explosion, and he was wrong. Both boilers exploded.
Oh
And the
God.
guy who took this picture lost an eye from a stable that went right into his skull. And I think there were fatalities. Anyway, that's the great crash at Crush, the ultimate railroad junction. So that's what I've got.
All right.
That's
Very nice.
Good program,
Yes,
thanks.
nice job, David. Thank you very much.
Very nice.
I used to live not far from Rondout,
Oh,
the great Rondout train robbery.
Yes.
yeah.
But
I saw a model of that once.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. I can't remember where. It was quite a while ago.
Yeah, that's
Well,
my old stomping grounds.
The other thing about Rondout is that it was not just a junction with the EJ&E and the Milwaukee Road, but the North Shore went right above, and that's North Shore Bridge is where you can take your pictures.
Yeah.
well, it's got to be one of the most photographed areas in a railroad history.
Sure.
I don't believe they still hoop up orders. I believe that has come to a halt. But I was there one time when a train, maybe a trainee engineer, missed getting his orders, and he didn't. He went right by, and so he had to stop, and that screwed things up for probably 2 hours. Someone had to walk back, get the orders, get fresh orders because he'd broken the rules. And it was just a royal mess. And, they were talking to each other over railroad radio. The communications that they had were perfect. I mean, they knew what to do and what they could do, but no, it had to be a written order. that was received, by the crew in the cab.
Yeah.
I heard a good story about how some veterans got around that. The crew and the engine missed the picking up the orders. They missed the hoop or whatever. But I think it was on the CB&Q. They had radios between the engine and the caboose, and the engineer called the conductor back in the caboose, and he says, Joe here, my head brakeman spilled coffee all over the orders. We can't read the damn things now. He says, can we just stop and like compare notes? Yeah, they actually did that. Yeah, he spilled coffee on the orders. He couldn't read them.
Well, he couldn't tell the truth because someone is listening to those radio
Oh
communications.
yeah. Well, later on, when cell phones came into vogue, they don't let them use them now. But that was a really good way to get around people hearing it on the radio. So.
You just, all
Kind of
right,
brings
well,
up
that
the
was-
question, what do they do with the orders when the weather's bad, when it's raining? Those are
Oh,
flimsy
yeah.
papers.
Yeah, I know. They hang them out there. But
They're wrapped up pretty tight, but yeah, you'd think they would
Yeah.
get soggy pretty fast.
yeah, maybe the layers protected them. I suppose the operator had to, wait till the last minute or something. I don't know. So, it's same thing with your switch list when you were switching in the yard. There were times when I had to call the yard master. I go like, man, my switch list is falling apart. I got to come in the office and get another one.
yeah. All
Even-
right, well, David, thank you very much. That was enjoyable as always, and you did a very nice job on the technology. I'm pretty soon we'll have you train the newbies. Next week, Bob Wondrock is going to present on making backdrops using artificial intelligence, and so that should be interesting. And then after next week, we'll take another brief hiatus while I travel through the area that I model and take notes. I'm finally getting back up there, so I'm looking forward to that. And but we don't need to look too far into the future. So we'll see you next week, and thanks everybody for joining us. Have a great Thursday.
And hope
Good
to see
night.
everybody's on Saturday.
What's that? Yeah, I'll see some of you guys on Saturday. That's right. All
Good
right.
night.
Well,
Good night.
everybody. Good night.
Bye.